Stop, do not get on the yacht. The shout tore through the golden calm of the marina like a siren. Seagulls scattered. Conversations froze. Every head turned toward the sound. At the edge of the dock stood a little girl, no older than 8, her denim jacket flapping in the ocean wind. Her voice, small yet fierce, carried across the glassy water. Please, do not step on the yacht. The billionaire, Thomas Gray, stopped mid-stride. His polished shoes gleamed in the last light of sunset. For a moment, he thought he had misheard. The girl was pointing straight at his vessel, his pride, the Vivian Grace, a 100-foot yacht that shimmered like liquid silver. Guests in formal suits and glittering dresses exchanged puzzled glances. The captain hesitated at the gangway, unsure whether to laugh or act. Thomas turned toward her, eyebrows drawn tight. "What did you say?" His voice was calm but heavy, like a man used to control. The girl's chest rose and fell. "Something is wrong. Please, do not start the engines." Her words hung in the air. Then a ripple of uneasy laughter spread through the group. A tall woman in a sequin gown whispered, "She must be lost." Another man muttered, "Probably a prank." But the girl did not move. She took one step closer to the edge, eyes locked on the propeller beneath the yacht. "There is something there," she said softly, almost trembling now. "I saw a red light." Thomas followed her gaze. At first, he saw only the reflection of the sunset dancing on the waves. Then, faintly, beneath the surface, a flicker of crimson pulsed against the metal blades. The security guard leaned over, squinting. "It might be a sensor, sir," he offered, but his voice betrayed doubt. The child's hands clenched at her sides. "It is not a sensor. Someone put it there." The tone in her voice was not panic, it was certainty. A quiet authority that made the hair on Thomas's arms rise. The dock fell silent again. Only the creak of ropes and the distant hum of an engine filled the air. Thomas knelt down to meet her eyes. "Who are you?" he asked gently. The girl swallowed hard. "My name is Amara. I clean the docks with my grandma. I saw a man here last night. He dropped something near your boat." Behind them, the waves lapped against the wood, steady and low. Then came a soft sound, a faint clicking from beneath the yacht, sharp and rhythmic, like a countdown. Thomas's face drained of color. "Everyone, step back," he shouted. The captain hit the emergency switch. The dock lights flickered. The red glow beneath the water pulsed brighter for one breathless second, then went dark. Silence swallowed the scene. Amara stood still, her small figure outlined by the setting sun. Thomas stared at her, stunned, his mind racing between disbelief and awe. The guests whispered behind him, frightened and confused. The ocean breeze carried the faint scent of salt and fuel. Somewhere in that stillness, Thomas realized her voice had just saved every soul on that dock, and the yacht that once symbolized his power now stood frozen in fear, reflecting one undeniable truth. Sometimes, the smallest voice can stop a storm before it starts. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a pale glow over the restless water. The marina lights flickered to life, reflecting against the sleek white body of the yacht. Yet, no one moved. The silence that followed the girl's warning stretched long and uneasy. Thomas Gray, still half-crouched beside the little girl, felt a chill crawl up his spine. He had faced boardroom betrayals, lawsuits, and crises that had cost millions of dollars, but nothing had ever made his heartbeat feel this loud. He looked at the child again, Amara. Her small frame stood firm, her wide brown eyes fixed on the dark water beneath the yacht. The captain broke the silence first. "Sir, the situation is under control. It was probably just a reflection or an underwater sensor malfunction." He tried to sound certain, but his voice cracked slightly. Thomas rose to his full height. "No, do not move the yacht until we know for sure." His tone left no room for argument. One of the guests, a tall man in a white linen suit, let out a nervous laugh. "You cannot possibly believe a child saw a bomb. Come on, Thomas. We are standing here like fools." Amara looked at him, her face calm but resolute. "I did not imagine it," she said quietly. "I saw a man last night. He was wearing black gloves. He dropped something in the water." The group exchanged glances. The woman in the sequin dress crossed her arms. "And you expect us to believe that?" "Children make up stories all the time." "Oh?" The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of salt and diesel. A security guard approached Thomas. "Sir, should I check it out?" Thomas hesitated for a breath, then nodded. "Do it carefully. No one else gets on board." The guard knelt near the edge, shining his flashlight into the water. The beam cut through the rippling surface, revealing the massive propeller glinting like gold beneath. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the light caught a small, cylindrical shape, wedged between the blades. Something metallic, something wrong. The guard inhaled sharply. "There is definitely something down there." Gasps rose from the guests. Someone stepped back. Someone whispered a prayer. Thomas's face hardened. "Get everyone off the dock." Amara stayed still. Her hands trembled slightly, but she did not look away. "That is it," she whispered. "That is what I saw." Police sirens began to echo in the distance, faint but growing louder. Someone must have called them already. The security team moved swiftly, ushering the guests back toward the marina gates. Yet Thomas did not move. His gaze stayed locked on the small girl beside him. "How did you see that in the dark?" Amara took a shallow breath. "I could not sleep. My grandmother works here cleaning the docks. Sometimes I help her. I saw a man crouch near your yacht. When I asked what he was doing, he ran away." Her honesty was simple and unflinching. It made Thomas's chest tighten. The flashing blue and red lights of police cruisers painted the water. Two officers approached quickly. "Who reported the possible explosive?" one asked. Thomas pointed at Amara. "She did." The officer blinked. "The child?" Thomas's expression softened. "Yes, and I believe her." They began cordoning off the area. A bomb squad van rolled to a stop, its engine humming low. Men in protective gear moved with sharp precision, setting up equipment near the dock. The guests were escorted farther back. The once celebratory night had turned into a silent standoff between fear and faith. While the professionals worked, Amara sat on a wooden crate near the edge, her knees pulled close to her chest. Thomas noticed she was shivering slightly in the cold wind. He took off his suit jacket and gently placed it over her shoulders. "You were brave," he said quietly. Amara's eyes stayed on the water. "My grandma says, if you see something wrong, you speak up. Even if no one believes you." Thomas smiled faintly. "She is right." A sudden shout came from the divers below. "Confirmed. It is a time device." Everyone froze. A wave of gasps rippled through the dock. The officers ordered an immediate evacuation. Thomas instinctively reached for Amara's hand. "Come with me," he said firmly. They backed away as the divers carefully disarmed the device. Minutes stretched into hours in the cold night air. Finally, one of the technicians surfaced and gave a thumbs up. "Safe. It has been neutralized." Cheers broke out from the crowd, though the sound was shaky with relief. Thomas turned to Amara. She looked exhausted but calm. The dock lights glimmered in her eyes like tiny stars. An officer approached. "Sir, we found traces of fingerprints on the casing. It seems to be professionally made. Whoever placed it knew your schedule." Thomas's jaw tightened. He glanced toward his guests, his staff, and finally his yacht. The world that once felt secure now seemed full of shadows. He knelt beside Amara again. "You saved lives tonight. Do you understand that?" She shrugged softly. "I just did what was right." Thomas wanted to say more, but words failed him. In the distance, the red glow of the disarmed device sat in a plastic evidence bag, dim but still haunting. The sea breeze brushed through Amara's curls. Somewhere behind them, a reporter's camera clicked. But Thomas did not care about headlines now. All he saw was the courage in a little girl who refused to stay silent. And as the waves lapped gently against the dock, one truth settled deep in his heart. The night he almost died was the night a child's voice became the sound of reason. By the next morning, the marina was no longer the glittering symbol of leisure it had been the day before. Yellow police tape fluttered in the soft breeze. Reporters stood behind barricades, microphones raised like spears, waiting for a glimpse of the man whose yacht had nearly exploded. But Thomas Gray was not giving statements. He sat on a weathered bench near the dock, his eyes fixed on the quiet water that had almost become his grave. Beside him sat Amara. Her small hands were folded neatly in her lap, Thomas's oversized jacket still draped over her shoulders. The morning sun lit her curls with a copper glow. Despite her calm face, she had not spoken much since the night before. Her gaze was distant, thoughtful, as though the world around her had grown too loud for her small body to contain. Thomas had spent the night replaying every second in his mind. The shout, the red light, the click, the silence. And her voice clear, steady, impossible to ignore. A voice that had cut through fear itself. He looked at her now. "Amara," he said softly, "you saved a lot of people last night. You saved me." She turned to him slowly. "I just did what anyone should do," she replied. Thomas shook his head. "No, not anyone would. Most adults would have looked away. You did not." For a moment, she said nothing. Then, her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "My grandmother says silence can be dangerous. She says bad things grow in silence." Thomas studied her, realizing how much wisdom lived in that small frame. He wanted to ask more, but a detective approached from behind the barricade. "Mr. Gray, the investigation team found something new," the man said. Thomas stood. "What is it?" The detective glanced at Amara, then back to him. "A fingerprint on the triggering mechanism. It matches someone from your security detail, a man named Douglas Reeves." Thomas's chest tightened. Douglas had been with him for 6 years. A quiet man, dependable, loyal, or so he had believed. "Where is he now?" "Gone," the detective replied. "He left town hours before the incident. We are issuing a warrant." Thomas exhaled slowly, his mind reeling. Betrayal had a taste, metallic and bitter, and he could feel it now. He looked back at the yacht, where a team of technicians still examined the hull. "He would have killed everyone on board," Thomas murmured. Amara's small voice broke the silence. "I saw him." Thomas turned sharply. "You did?" She nodded. "That night. He was near the dock. He had a black bag. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was fixing something for you, but his eyes looked wrong." Thomas knelt in front of her, careful not to startle her. "Amara, this is very important. Did anyone else see him?" She shook her head. "No, it was just me. Grandma was sleeping." The detective took notes, then offered a reassuring smile. "You are very brave, young lady. You may have helped us stop something much worse." When the detective left, Thomas sat back down. His thoughts spun between anger and gratitude. "Amara," he said slowly, "would you like some breakfast? There is a small cafe nearby. My treat." Her eyes lit up, then dimmed again with hesitation. "I should go home. My grandma worries when I am late." "Then we will bring her breakfast too," Thomas said with a small smile. Minutes later, they sat inside the Marina Cafe, the faint hum of conversation filling the air. Thomas ordered pancakes, eggs, and orange juice for her, coffee for himself. He watched as she stared at the steaming plate, clearly unsure whether she was allowed to eat first. "Go ahead," he said gently. "It is yours." Amara took a careful bite. For the first time, she smiled, a small, uncertain curve of her lips that made Thomas's chest ache with something he could not name. "You and your grandmother live nearby?" he asked. "Yes, behind the storage sheds," she answered. "She cleans the docks when the boats leave. Sometimes I help." "Does she know what happened last night?" Amara looked down. "Not yet. She was not feeling well. I did not want to scare her." Thomas stirred his coffee slowly. "Would it be all right if I walked you home later, just to make sure you are safe?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Grandma likes polite people. She will not mind." They left the cafe an hour later. The sky had turned a clean, endless blue. As they walked along the pier, people whispered, pointing discreetly. Cameras clicked again. The world now knew her name, the little girl who saved a billionaire. Amara ignored the attention. She walked beside Thomas quietly, holding a small brown paper bag with leftover pancakes for her grandmother. When they reached the row of storage sheds, Thomas saw where she lived, a narrow alley tucked behind the boatyard, with sheets of metal leaning against the wall to block the wind. A cot, a few blankets, and a plastic crate of dishes. It was humble, too humble for someone who had risked her life the night before. Amara's grandmother, a frail woman with kind eyes and silver hair, looked up as they approached. "Amara," she called, "where have you been?" Thomas stepped forward and smiled gently. "Ma'am, my name is Thomas Gray. Your granddaughter saved my life last night." The old woman blinked, confused. "Saved your life?" Amara nodded. handing her the bag. "He was the man on the yacht, Grandma, the one that almost blew up." For a moment, silence hung between them. Then the grandmother pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "Oh, child," she whispered, looking at Thomas. "She always sees things others do not." Thomas looked around at their small shelter, the worn blankets, the careful order of their few possessions. Something shifted inside him, an awareness he had not felt in years. He had built towers of glass and steel, but this small corner of the world held more courage and decency than any of them. As he turned back to Amara, she met his eyes with quiet honesty. "You are safe now," she said. Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes, because of you." In that moment, under the bright morning light, the billionaire and the little girl stood side by side, not as two worlds apart, but as two lives forever changed by one simple act of courage. That afternoon, the wind carried the scent of sea salt and diesel through the marina. The sun sat high above, bright but cold, casting hard reflections on the rippling surface of the water. Reporters had left, and police tape had been removed. The dock looked quiet again, almost normal, but Thomas Gray knew it was only the surface. Beneath that calm, a storm of questions still waited. He stood near the end of the pier, looking at the yacht that had nearly cost him everything. Its polished surface gleamed as if nothing had happened, yet he could not look at it the same way anymore. The image of that blinking red light still flashed in his memory. A soft voice broke through his thoughts. "Mr. Thomas?" He turned. Amara was standing a few steps behind him, clutching a folded blanket. The oversized jacket he had given her was neatly draped over her arm. She looked hesitant, unsure if she should speak. "You do not have to call me Mr.," Thomas said gently. "Just Thomas is fine." She shook her head. "Grandma says we should be respectful." Her manners drew a faint smile from him. "Then I will have to earn the right to be called Thomas," he said. "How is your grandmother?" "She is resting," Amara replied. "The doctor from the marina came by this morning. You sent him, did you not?" Thomas nodded. "I wanted to make sure she was comfortable." Amara hesitated before stepping closer. "She told me to thank you. She said no one has ever done something like that for us." He looked at the small girl in front of him, the same one who had stood against an entire crowd the night before. "It is I who should be thanking her," he said quietly. "She raised someone extraordinary." Amara blushed and looked away, the wind tugging lightly at her hair. "We just do what we can." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of gulls filled the space between them. Thomas finally broke the silence. "Would you like to see inside the yacht?" Her eyes widened in surprise. "Me?" "Yes. You saved it. You deserve to see what you saved." Amara's fingers tightened around the blanket. "I do not know if Grandma would like that. She says rich people's places are not for us." Thomas crouched to her level, his voice calm but firm. "Your grandmother sounds very wise, but maybe she has never met a rich man who learned something from a child." That made her smile, small but real. "Can I just look for a little while?" "That is all I ask," he said. They walked together across the dock. The crew members, now fewer than before, nodded politely as they passed. Thomas guided her up the gangway, careful to walk slowly so she would not slip. The interior of the yacht was a world of glass, chrome, and soft light. The scent of polished wood filled the air. Amara's eyes moved from the curved staircase to the wall of windows that opened toward the sea. "It looks like a house that floats," she whispered. Thomas chuckled softly. "That is exactly what it is. I have spent half my life building things like this." She traced her fingers along the railing, her small hand leaving faint prints on the polished metal. "It is beautiful, but also quiet." He turned toward her. "Too quiet?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, it feels like it is waiting for something." Thomas looked around and realized she was right. The silence of the yacht no longer felt peaceful. It felt empty. The parties, the laughter, the noise, none of it echoed here now. It was just him and this child who somehow saw what no one else did. Amara stopped in front of a large framed photograph on the wall. It showed Thomas and a woman in a white dress, smiling beside the same yacht years earlier. "Is that your wife?" she asked. Thomas's throat tightened. "It was," he said quietly. "Her name was Vivian. She loved the ocean. She named the yacht after herself." Amara looked at the picture for a long moment. "She looks kind," she said. "She was," Thomas replied. "She believed this yacht brought her peace. I thought building it would make me happy. But after she passed away, it just became another place to hide." Amara turned to him. "Maybe you were supposed to hear her again through the waves." Her words startled him not because of what she said, but because of the calm certainty in her voice. It was the same certainty she had when she shouted her warning. "You sound like someone who has seen too much for her age," he said. She shrugged. "When you grow up near the water, you learn to listen. The ocean always says something. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it." Thomas felt an ache behind his ribs that he could not name. He looked out through the glass toward the endless horizon. "I have spent years talking, Amara," he said. "Maybe it is time I started listening." "Once it," she smiled softly, then pointed at a small object on the floor near the corner of the cabin. It was a silver watch, its strap broken. "Is that yours?" Thomas frowned and picked it up. It was not his. The back of the watch was engraved with initials DR. His pulse quickened. "Douglas Reeves," he whispered. Amara's eyes widened. "The man from last night?" Thomas nodded slowly. He must have dropped it when he planted the device. For a moment, both of them stood still, realizing what it meant. The evidence was right there, hidden in plain sight. Thomas carefully placed the watch into a plastic bag left behind by investigators. "You have good eyes, Amara." She grinned faintly. "My grandma says that too." Thomas looked at her, a quiet determination forming in his gaze. "You may have just helped us catch him." Outside, the wind shifted again, carrying the smell of the tide. The yacht rocked gently, as though acknowledging the small girl who had once shouted against the sea and changed everything. And in that quiet space filled with light and truth, Thomas Gray understood that sometimes miracles did not arrive with thunder or fire. They came in the form of a child's courage and a voice that refused to be ignored. The following morning broke clear and still. The sea stretched wide and silver beneath a pale sky, as if the world itself had paused to breathe. Thomas Gray stood at his study window inside his seaside villa, staring at the waves that rolled in gentle, endless rhythm. The events of the past 2 days clung to him like salt on his skin, sharp, lingering, and impossible to forget. On his desk lay the evidence bag that held Douglas Reeves's silver watch. The initials DR glimmered faintly under the morning light. Next to it sat a folded note written in Amara's neat, careful handwriting. She had left it the night before when he had walked her and her grandmother back to their small shelter behind the storage sheds. The note said simply, "Thank you for listening." Thomas traced the words with his fingertip, feeling an ache he could not quite name. He had spent years surrounded by power and numbers, by walls of glass and wealth. Yet, nothing had reached him as deeply as the voice of a child who refused to stay silent. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. It was his assistant, Daniel. "Sir, the police have confirmed the watch belongs to Douglas Reeves. They found his car abandoned near the state border. They believe he had help leaving the city." Thomas turned slowly. "Help from inside my company?" Daniel hesitated. "It appears so. The investigation is ongoing." Thomas looked down at the watch again. "We trusted him with everything. He knew our routes, our schedules, even the maintenance patterns of the yacht." Betrayal often comes from proximity, sir," Daniel said quietly. Thomas nodded. "Yes, and loyalty comes from places you least expect." He glanced once more at the note from Amara before setting it inside his briefcase. "Prepare the car. We are going back to the marina." When they arrived, the dock was quieter than before. A few fishermen were mending nets in the distance, and seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp and echoing. Amara was there, kneeling beside her grandmother, folding blankets into a small wooden chest. Thomas approached slowly, not wanting to startle them. "Good morning," he said softly. Amara looked up, surprised but smiling. "You came back." "Of course," Thomas replied. "I had a promise to keep." Her grandmother straightened, leaning slightly on a cane. "You have already done more than enough, Mr. Gray." Thomas shook his head. "No, ma'am. I have done very little. Your granddaughter did the impossible." He reached into his pocket and took out an envelope. "I wanted to offer you both a safe place to stay. There is a small guest house on my property. It is quiet, close to the sea, and it is warm at night. The grandmother's eyes filled with cautious disbelief. We cannot accept charity, sir. We have lived fine with what little we have. Thomas smiled kindly. This is not charity, it is gratitude. And it is also a request. Amara tilted her head. A request? Yes, he said. I need your help. Someone I trusted tried to harm me. I want to understand why. Sometimes the truth hides in plain sight, and I think you, Amara, have a way of seeing what others miss. The grandmother looked at her granddaughter, uncertain. She is only a child. Thomas met her gaze respectfully. She is also the only one who noticed the danger when hundreds of adults did not. Amara's brow furrowed. You think the man who left the watch might come back? I think he will try to finish what he started, Thomas said. And if he does, I want to be ready. The grandmother sighed, her face softening. If you promise she will be safe, Thomas nodded solemnly. I give you my word. Within the hour, the small shelter behind the sheds was packed into Thomas's car. Amara sat in the back seat, watching the marina fade behind them. Her grandmother rested beside her, quiet but alert. The road to Thomas's estate curved along the coastline, where cliffs met the sea in jagged lines of beauty and danger. When they arrived, Amara pressed her palms against the car window, awed by the sprawling white house that overlooked the water. It looks like it touches the sky, she whispered. Thomas smiled faintly. It used to feel empty. Maybe it will not anymore. Inside, the staff greeted them with polite curiosity. Thomas introduced Amara and her grandmother as guests, not as strangers. He personally showed them to a small cottage near the main house, a place once used by visiting artists. The cottage had a view of the ocean, a fireplace, and walls painted a soft shade of blue. Amara walked around the room slowly, running her hand along the smooth wood of the table. It smells like lemon, she said, smiling. That is the polish, Thomas replied. Do you like it? She nodded. It feels safe. Ugh. Her grandmother sank into a chair, her eyes misty. You have given us more than we could ever repay. Thomas looked at them both, his voice gentle. You already have. Later that evening, Thomas returned to the main house. The sky outside had deepened to indigo, and the air was heavy with the scent of the sea. He stood by his office window, staring out at the cottage lights flickering below. For the first time in years, he did not feel alone. He picked up the phone and called the detective. Yes, I have the watch. And yes, the girl saw him clearly. I will send her description to you tomorrow. Make sure her name is not mentioned publicly. She has done enough. When he hung up, he poured himself a glass of water and sat down. The quiet of the house felt different now, less hollow, more alive. At that same moment, outside near the cottage, Amara stepped onto the porch. She could see the reflection of the moon across the water and hear the gentle sound of the waves rolling against the rocks. She hugged her blanket tighter around her shoulders and whispered softly to herself, Grandma was right. The ocean really does talk. And from the window of the big house above, Thomas watched the small figure standing by the sea, the girl who had seen danger in the dark and brought light back into his life. The next morning arrived with the hush of waves and a golden spill of sunlight over the coastal hills. Thomas Gray woke earlier than usual, long before the house stirred. The air smelled faintly of salt and jasmine, the kind that lingered after a calm night. He had barely slept. His mind kept circling back to the same thought: Douglas Reeves was still out there. As he poured himself a cup of coffee, he glanced out the window toward the guest cottage near the garden. Smoke rose softly from its chimney, twisting into the pale morning sky. It gave him an unfamiliar sense of comfort. For the first time in years, someone else's life stirred within his property, gentle, real, and warm. He walked outside. The gravel path crunched under his shoes as he approached the cottage. The door was slightly open. Inside, Amara was sitting at the small wooden table, eating breakfast with her grandmother. The old woman smiled when she saw him. Good morning, Mr. Gray, she greeted, her voice still soft with sleep. Thomas smiled. Good morning. I hope you both slept well. We did, Amara answered. The bed is very soft. I think it might be the softest thing I have ever slept on. Her words made him chuckle quietly. That is good to hear. There will be plenty of mornings like this for you now. He noticed the drawing on the table. Amara had sketched something with a dull pencil on a scrap of paper. It was the ocean, with a small figure standing at the edge of a dock. Above it, in uneven letters, she had written, "Sometimes the sea listens back." Thomas studied the picture for a moment. "You draw beautifully," he said. Amara shrugged, embarrassed. "It helps me think. Grandma says drawing is another kind of talking." "That is very wise," he replied. The grandmother poured tea into 3 cups. "Mr. Gray, I want to thank you again," she said. "You gave us more than a roof. You gave my granddaughter her smile back. That is something money cannot buy." Thomas's throat tightened slightly. "If you knew how much that smile has done for me," he said softly, "you would not thank me at all." They talked for a few minutes longer until his phone buzzed in his pocket. The name on the screen made his expression darken. It was the detective. He stepped outside to answer. "Yes?" The voice on the other end was grim. "We found the abandoned car belonging to Douglas Reeves, but there was another discovery. Inside the trunk, there were maps and schedules of your upcoming travel plans. He knew everything, Mr. Gray, and it appears he had an accomplice inside your company." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Do you know who?" "Not yet, but you should stay cautious. Until we catch him, do not trust anyone new near your home or the marina." Thomas thanked him and ended the call, feeling the weight of unease settle over him again. The breeze off the ocean suddenly felt colder. When he turned back toward the cottage, he saw Amara standing in the doorway. "Is something wrong?" she asked. He forced a small smile. "Nothing you need to worry about. The police are doing their job." She tilted her head, unconvinced. "Your eyes look worried." He exhaled slowly. "You see more than most people do, Amara." She walked toward him, the hem of her dress brushing against the grass. "Grandma says when you feel scared, you should not hide it. You should name it, because things you name cannot grow in the dark." Her words landed heavier than she could have known. Thomas looked out toward the sea again, the sunlight glinting off the water. "Maybe I have been hiding fear for too long," he said. "Maybe it is time I stop." That afternoon, Thomas invited both of them to the main house for lunch. The dining room, usually silent and sterile, now echoed with small laughter. Amara told stories about her grandmother's cat, about how it once chased a crab across the docks. Thomas found himself laughing real, effortless laughter that he had not felt in years. But when the laughter faded, his eyes drifted to the window. A black car was parked at the edge of the long driveway. It was unfamiliar. "Daniel," he called to his assistant, who was setting plates on the table. "Is someone expected?" Daniel frowned and walked to the window. "No, sir. I will check." Amara followed Thomas's gaze, sensing the sudden tension. "That is not one of your cars, is it?" "No," he said quietly. Moments later, Daniel returned. "The car is empty, no driver. The engine is still warm." Thomas's pulse quickened. "Call the detective. Tell him we may have a visitor." While Daniel stepped out to make the call, Thomas turned to Amara and her grandmother. "Please stay inside the house until I know it is safe." Amara's grandmother nodded, gripping her granddaughter's hand. The detective arrived 20 minutes later with 2 officers. They inspected the car, found no sign of forced entry, and confirmed it had been stolen that morning from a nearby town. The incident seemed like nothing, yet Thomas could not shake the feeling of being watched. That night, long after the police had left, Thomas stood on his balcony overlooking the garden. Below, he could see the light still glowing softly from the cottage window. He watched as Amara's shadow moved past the curtain, her small hand placing the drawing of the dock against the window pane. Then, the light went out. Thomas stayed there, listening to the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. For the first time, the sound did not bring peace, it carried warning. Somewhere in that dark stretch of coastline, he knew the man who had betrayed him was still out there, waiting. And though Thomas Gray had power, wealth, and security, it was the courage of an 8-year-old girl that gave him the only kind of safety that truly mattered: faith. He turned toward the sea once more and whispered under his breath, "Whatever happens next, I will protect them." The tide answered with a low, steady roar, as if the ocean itself had heard his promise. The following morning dawned gray and heavy, with clouds stacked low over the sea. The air carried the metallic scent that comes before rain. Thomas Gray stood on the balcony, sipping coffee that had already gone cold. He had barely slept. Every sound through the night, the creak of wood, the rustle of wind had felt amplified, like a whisper from danger. Below him, the guest cottage looked peaceful. Thin smoke curled from its chimney, and he could faintly hear Amara's laughter mixing with the ocean breeze. Her laughter had become a kind of music in this quiet place, something that reminded him there was still light after darkness. But the image of the stolen black car still lingered in his mind. Whoever had left it had done so on purpose. It was not random. It was a message. He turned when he heard footsteps. It was Daniel, his assistant, holding a folder. "Sir," the detective called again. They traced Douglas Reeves's bank transactions. There was a large payment deposited 2 weeks before the incident. Thomas set down his cup. "From whom?" Daniel opened the folder. "A shell company registered overseas, but the account links back to one of your subsidiaries, Gray Marine Holdings." Thomas's jaw tightened. "That is my own company." "Yes, sir," Daniel said carefully, "but the payment did not come from you. It came from an internal account. Someone on the inside authorized it." Thomas stared out at the sea, the waves shifting from silver to deep blue under the weight of the clouds. "Find out who had access to that account," he said. "I already did," Daniel replied. "Only 3 people, you, Douglas Reeves, and me." The words hung in the air like a slow echo. Thomas turned to look at him, studying every flicker in his assistant's expression. Daniel had been with him for almost a decade, loyal and efficient. But now, even that loyalty felt uncertain. Thomas's voice stayed calm. "And should I be worried about you, Daniel?" Daniel met his gaze. "No, sir, but you should be careful. Whoever funded this knew too much about your life to be a stranger." When Daniel left, Thomas remained still for a long moment. He picked up his phone, thinking of the detective, then stopped. Something told him that the answer would not come from the police, it would come from the past. Later that afternoon, the weather turned. A drizzle began to fall, painting soft ripples across the window panes. Amara sat inside the main house near the fireplace, drawing again. Thomas walked in quietly, noticing her sketch this time was different. It was not the sea or the docks. It was a man's shadow standing near a car beneath the moon. He crouched down beside her. "That looks familiar," he said. She nodded. "It is the same car that came yesterday. I saw it again last night." Thomas's pulse quickened. "You saw it where?" "Near the cliff road," she said. "I woke up to get water, and I saw headlights moving near the trees. But when I looked again, they were gone." He stood alert now. "Did you tell anyone?" "I told Grandma," Amara replied. "But she said maybe it was just a fisherman or someone lost." Thomas walked to the window. The ocean stretched dark and endless beyond the fog. "You have good eyes, Amara," he said. "You notice things most people overlook." She looked at him seriously. "That is because people only see what they want to see. They do not look at what scares them." Her words landed deep. He turned back toward her. "Do you ever get scared?" "Yes," she said simply. "But Grandma says being scared is not wrong. It is what you do after that matters." Thomas smiled faintly, though the worry never left his eyes. He called for one of his security guards and quietly instructed him to check the cliff road. The guard left immediately. As night began to fall, Thomas joined Amara and her grandmother for dinner in the cottage. The rain drummed softly on the roof. The small table was set with warm soup, bread, and tea. It felt ordinary, almost peaceful, and Thomas found himself grateful for it. But the calm shattered when his phone buzzed sharply on the table. It was the security guard. "Sir, I found tire tracks near the cliff road, fresh ones. There is also an abandoned camera pointing toward your house." Thomas's stomach dropped. "Do not touch anything. I am coming there myself." He stood and looked at Amara and her grandmother. "Stay inside and lock the door," he said firmly. Amara's eyes widened. "Is it him?" "I do not know," he replied, "but I will find out." The road to the cliffs was slick from the rain. Thomas drove slowly, headlights cutting through the mist. When he reached the bend overlooking the sea, he saw the tracks clearly. They led toward a narrow path ending in a patch of wet grass. There, half hidden by a boulder, was a small camera mounted on a tripod, its red indicator light still blinking. He crouched to inspect it. The lens was aimed directly at his property, A chill ran through him. Someone had been watching not just him, but Amara and her grandmother. He took out his phone to call the detective but paused when a voice came from behind. "You should not be out here alone, Mr. Gray." Thomas turned. It was Daniel, standing near the car, an umbrella in his hand. Thomas's heart thudded once, heavy and uncertain. "How did you know I was here?" Daniel smiled faintly. "You told me to find out who had access to the account. I thought you might come looking yourself." Thomas studied him in silence. The sound of rain filled the distance between them. For the first time, he could not tell whether the man in front of him was friend or foe. "Finally," Daniel said, "we should leave before the tide rises. It is not safe here." Thomas looked once more at the blinking red light of the camera, then at the darkening horizon. Something about this felt wrong, but he said nothing. He nodded slowly. "You are right. Let us go." As they drove back through the rain, the waves crashed violently against the cliffs, and Thomas knew one truth for certain: someone was still watching, and the danger that had started at the dock was far from over. The following day came gray and cool, with a thin fog rising off the sea like breath from something sleeping. Thomas Gray sat at the long dining table in his villa, staring at the steaming cup of coffee in front of him. He had not touched it. The rain from the previous night had stopped, but its memory lingered in the damp air and in his mind. The camera by the cliff had been taken by the police at dawn. The detective had promised to analyze the footage, but Thomas already knew what it would show. Someone had been watching his house for days, maybe weeks. He could not shake the image of that blinking red light in the fog. It reminded him too much of the light that had flashed under his yacht. Both had been warnings. Both had been meant for him. A knock sounded at the door. It was Daniel, holding a tablet. "Sir," he said, "the detective sent the first analysis. You should see this." Thomas took the tablet. The video began with the faint sound of wind and waves. The lens, hidden near the rocks, faced his house exactly as he had feared. At first, there was nothing but stillness. Then, a figure appeared at the edge of the frame. The man was tall, wearing a dark coat and cap, his movements careful and deliberate. He turned his head slightly toward the camera, revealing a sharp jawline and familiar eyes. It was Douglas Reeves. Thomas froze. "This footage was taken when?" "2 nights ago," Daniel said quietly. "He was here." Thomas's grip tightened around the tablet. "He is watching me, Daniel." "Watching us. There is more," Daniel said. "The detective believes someone from inside your company is still feeding him information. That is how he knew where to look." Thomas looked out the window toward the cottage below. Smoke drifted lazily from its chimney. "Then he also knows about them," he said in a low voice. Daniel hesitated. "Do you want me to move them somewhere else for safety?" Thomas shook his head firmly. "No. This is their home now. I will not let fear chase them away again." Later that morning, Amara came to the main house carrying a basket of shells she had collected from the beach. Her boots were muddy, her hair wild from the wind, but her eyes shone bright. "Look what I found," she said, placing the shells on the table. Thomas forced a smile. "Those are beautiful." "Oh." She picked up one shaped like a spiral. "Grandma says each shell holds the sound of the sea. When you listen close, you can hear it talk." He nodded. "I used to believe that when I was your age." She looked at him with quiet honesty. "Do you still believe it?" He thought for a moment before answering. "I believe the sea remembers. It does not forget what it sees." Her smile faded slightly. "You mean the bad things too?" "Yes," he said softly. "Especially those." Amara studied his face for a long moment, as if she could see the storm behind his eyes. "You are thinking about that man again, are you not?" Thomas nodded. "I am. He used to work for me. I trusted him. Now he wants to hurt me." "I do not understand why." Amara sat down across from him. "Sometimes people hurt others because they are lost. Grandma says lost people walk in circles until someone helps them see where they are." He looked at her, startled by the weight of her words. "And how do you help someone like that?" "You do not run away," she said. "You stand where the light is and let them see it." Before he could reply, Daniel entered again, his expression tense. "Sir, there is something else." The police traced a series of phone calls made from a burner phone near the marina. The last call was to a number registered to one of your executives. His name is Richard Kane. Thomas frowned. Richard? He manages Gray Marine's insurance division. Yes, Daniel said. And he had direct access to your travel records and to the account that funded Douglas Reeves. Thomas stood. Find him. I want to see his face when he explains this. By afternoon, Richard Kane arrived at the villa, his suit immaculate, his smile calm but uneasy. Thomas, he began, I came as soon as I got your message. Thomas gestured for him to sit. I will make this simple. You authorized a payment 2 weeks ago through a holding account. That money ended up in Douglas Reeves's hands. Why? Richard blinked. Thomas, there must be some mistake. I have not. Thomas slammed a folder onto the table. Inside were printed bank records. Do not lie to me. For a moment, Richard's face twitched, and the mask slipped. You would not understand, he said. You built an empire, but you left people behind. Reeves was supposed to make you pay attention. That was all. By killing me? Thomas asked coldly. Richard's eyes hardened. No one was supposed to die. He wanted to scare you, make you see how many lives you control without caring. The air in the room thickened. Thomas's voice dropped to a whisper. You endangered a child, Richard. You let an innocent girl stand between your guilt and my life. Richard's mouth opened, but no words came. The weight of what he had done hung between them. Thomas signaled for Daniel, who stepped forward with 2 officers. The police are waiting outside, Thomas said quietly. You can tell them the rest. When Richard was led away, the house fell silent again. Thomas walked to the window. Outside, Amara was sitting on the steps of the cottage, her chin resting on her knees, watching the sky turn from gray to gold. He stepped out onto the porch and called to her. Amara. She looked up. Is it over? He nodded slowly. Part of it. There is still more to do. She smiled faintly. Then we will wait for the rest together. As the sun broke through the clouds, a single beam of light touched the waves. It glowed across the surface of the sea, bright and steady, like a promise that the dark could never fully win. And Thomas Gray, standing there beside the little girl who had saved him, realized that the sea did remember, but it also forgave. That night, a restless wind swept through the coastal hills, bending the tall grass and rattling the shutters of the old villa. The sea churned under a half-hidden moon, its rhythm uneasy and unpredictable. Inside the cottage near the main house, Amara lay awake, listening. The soft ticking of the clock and the distant crash of waves were usually comforting. But tonight, the sounds carried something different, an undercurrent of warning. Her grandmother slept quietly in the bed beside her, breathing slow and steady. Amara sat up, pulled the blanket around her shoulders, and glanced toward the window. The glass was fogged from the cool air outside, but through the haze, she saw something, a flicker of movement near the trees by the fence line. She leaned closer. There it was again, a shadow, quick and deliberate, passing through the light of the garden lamps. Amara's heart thudded once, hard enough for her to feel it in her throat. For a moment, she wanted to believe it was only the wind or a stray animal, but the shape was too tall, too human. She slid off the bed and padded across the floor, careful not to wake her grandmother. Her small hand trembled slightly as she reached for the doorknob. The cool metal sent a shiver up her arm. She opened the door just enough to peer outside. The air was damp and cold. The garden was quiet except for the soft rustle of palm leaves. Then she saw it clearly. Someone was standing near the old stone wall that bordered the property. The figure wore dark clothes, a hood drawn up, face hidden. Amara's breath caught. She stepped back quickly and closed the door. Her heart raced as she tried to think. Then she remembered what Grandma always said. When you are afraid, do not freeze. Move your fear into something brave. She ran to the small desk where Thomas had left a walkie-talkie earlier that day for emergencies. Her fingers fumbled with the button. Mr. Thomas, she whispered, her voice shaking. Someone is outside near the wall. The response came instantly. Amara, stay inside. Lock the door. I am coming. Thomas was already in his study when her call came through. He snatched a flashlight and his phone, alerting security as he ran toward the back of the property. The path from the main house to the cottage was slick with dew, and the night air bit cold against his face. When he reached the cottage, Amara was waiting just inside the locked door, her eyes wide but steady. He was near the wall, she said quickly. He was watching. Thomas knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. You did the right thing, he said firmly. You called me, and that is what matters. Outside, flashlights cut through the darkness as the guards fanned out across the property. The sound of their radios crackled softly in the distance. Amara peered up at Thomas. Do you think it was the same man? He hesitated before answering. I think so. One of the guards called out from the far end of the garden. Sir, we found footprints near the fence. Heavy boots. He climbed over the wall. Thomas's stomach tightened. Which direction? Toward the cliffs, the guard shouted back. Thomas looked down at Amara. He is gone for now, but I need you to promise something. You stay close to your grandmother, and you do not come outside unless I tell you. All right? Amara nodded. I promise. Thomas stood and turned to one of the guards. Double the patrols. Keep the lights on all night. If anyone sees movement near the cliffs, alert me immediately. The rest of the night passed in tense silence. Rain began to fall around midnight, soft and steady, masking every sound. Thomas stayed awake in his study, staring at the small monitor connected to the property's security cameras. Occasionally, he glanced at the screen showing the cottage. Its light glowed faintly through the rain, a small beacon of safety in the dark. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the sense of unease remained. The detective arrived shortly after sunrise. His expression was grim. We checked the surrounding roads, he said. There were tire marks near the cliffs again. Whoever it was, he was watching from the same area as before. Thomas rubbed his temples. So he came back to finish what he started. The detective nodded, or to make sure you knew he could. Amara appeared in the doorway, her hands clasped in front of her. He is not going to stop, is he? She asked quietly. The detective looked at her kindly. We will stop him. You do not have to worry. But Thomas saw the truth in her eyes. She already understood that promises could not always hold back danger. Later that afternoon, Thomas took a walk along the edge of the property. The sky had cleared, and the sea shimmered beneath the pale sunlight. He stopped near the wall where the intruder had stood. The footprints were still visible in the damp earth. He crouched, touching the imprint of the boot. Amara's voice echoed in his memory. People only see what they want to see. He realized she had been right all along. For years, he had lived behind walls of power and security, blind to the shadows just beyond them. Now those shadows had come to find him. When he returned to the cottage, Amara was sitting by the window, her sketchbook open. She had drawn the sea again, but this time, a small figure stood beside it, facing a storm. Above the drawing, she had written, "Bravery is not the end of fear, it is walking through it." Thomas looked at her, his chest heavy with pride and worry. You really are something extraordinary, he said softly. Amara smiled faintly, her pencil still moving. Grandma says storms always show you who you are. Outside, thunder rolled again in the distance, low and steady, as if the sky itself agreed. By the next morning, the storm had drifted out to sea, leaving behind air so clear it almost hurt to breathe. The sunlight broke through the windows of the cottage, spilling across the wooden floor and catching tiny specks of dust that danced like gold. Amara stirred awake to the smell of something warm and sweet. Her grandmother was cooking pancakes in the small kitchen, humming softly to herself. For the first time in days, the morning felt almost peaceful. When Amara stepped outside, she saw Thomas standing near the garden, speaking quietly into his phone. His expression was serious but not afraid. When he noticed her, he ended the call and smiled. Good morning, Amara. Did you sleep well? She nodded. Better than before. Grandma says the sea is calmer today. Maybe that means good things are coming. Thomas looked out toward the water, where the waves glimmered in the sunlight. I think your grandmother might be right, he said. The detective called. They found a trail, some supplies hidden near the cliffs. They think Douglas Reeves has been hiding somewhere nearby. Amara frowned slightly. Do you think he will come back? Thomas's eyes softened. I think he already did, but now he knows he cannot scare us, and that makes him weaker. They walked together toward the main house. The air smelled of wet earth and salt. The world seemed fragile but alive, like something rebuilding itself after being broken. Inside, Daniel was waiting with a tray of breakfast and a stack of papers. Sir, he said, The police would like you to stay in town for a few days while they finish searching the area. They believe Reeves might still try to contact someone from the company. Thomas shook his head. If I leave, he wins. I will not abandon this house or the people in it. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. Understood. I will tighten security and install more lights around the property. As Daniel left, Thomas noticed Amara standing near the piano. Her fingers traced the edge of the keys, though she did not press any of them. Do you play? He asked. She shook her head. No, but I like how it sounds when people do. My grandma says it is like the sea, it can whisper or roar. Thomas smiled faintly. Would you like to hear it? She looked up, her eyes shining. Can you play? It has been a long time, he admitted, but let us see. He sat at the piano, pressing the first few keys gently. The notes wavered, uncertain, then steadied into a slow, haunting melody. It filled the room like light moving across water. Amara sat beside him, her feet swinging just above the floor, listening in silence. After a while, she said softly, "It sounds like remembering." Thomas paused, his hands hovering over the keys. "Maybe it is," he said. "It was my wife's favorite song." Amara looked at him. "The lady in the picture on your yacht?" He nodded. "Yes, she loved music. She said songs are like promises, you do not forget them even when the sound fades." Amara thought about that for a moment, then said, "Maybe that is why the sea keeps singing. It remembers everything people forget." Thomas turned to her, studying her small face lit by the soft morning Sunday. "You know, Amara, for someone your age, you understand more than most adults I know." She smiled shyly. "Grandma says it is because I listen more than I talk." They both laughed quietly, and for a brief moment, the weight that had hung over them lifted. Later that afternoon, the detective arrived again. His car rolled up the long gravel driveway, kicking up dust behind it. Thomas met him on the porch. "Any progress?" he asked. The detective nodded. "We found where Reeves has been hiding a storage building near the old boatyard. He has been watching your house from there. We also found more evidence that someone from inside your company helped him. It might take time to bring them all in, but we will get them." Thomas's shoulders eased, though tension still lingered in his jaw. "I appreciate everything you are doing." The detective's gaze softened. "You should also thank that little girl. She saw him before anyone else did. If not for her, this would be a very different story." Thomas glanced toward the garden, where Amara was sitting on the grass, sketching again. "Believe me," he said quietly, "I thank her every day." That evening, Thomas brought dinner to the cottage himself. The table was simple bread, soup, and tea, but the conversation was warm. Amara's grandmother told stories about her younger days cleaning ships, about how she once saw dolphins following the boats out to sea. Amara listened with wide eyes, interrupting now and then with questions that made them both laugh. When the meal ended, Thomas stood to leave, but Amara stopped him. "Mr. Thomas," she said softly, "do you think people can change, even the bad ones?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I think everyone has a choice to change, but not everyone is brave enough to take it." She nodded slowly. "Then maybe the brave ones are the ones who need the most light." He smiled gently. "You might be right." Outside, the moon rose over the water, casting a silver path across the waves. The air was cool but calm, filled with the faint hum of crickets and the soft rhythm of the tide. Before returning to the main house, Thomas turned back to look at the cottage one last time. Through the window, he saw Amara helping her grandmother wash the dishes, both of them laughing quietly. The sight stirred something deep within him, a feeling he had not known in years. He realized then that the danger, though not gone, had already lost its power. What remained was something stronger: trust, courage, and the fragile but growing bond between three lives that had found each other by chance and held on through fear. And as the night deepened, Thomas whispered to the sea, "Let this peace last." The wind carried his words away, soft and steady, like a promise returned. The next few days passed with an uneasy calm that felt almost too fragile to trust. The air around the villa seemed quieter, the waves gentler, and the sun warmer. Yet Thomas Gray knew that peace was often the moment before truth revealed itself. Each morning, he met with the detective to review new reports. Each evening, He joined Amara and her grandmother for dinner at the cottage. Their laughter had become part of the rhythm of his days, something ordinary, something grounding. But deep inside, the unanswered question still pressed against him like the tide against the rocks. Why had Douglas Reeves done it? Why had a man he trusted chosen betrayal? On the fourth morning, Thomas stood by the cliffs, the wind pulling at his coat. From here, he could see both the endless sea and the distant marina where everything had begun. The yacht, still under repair, glinted faintly in the Sunday. The sight filled him with both gratitude and grief. He remembered his wife's voice, her belief that the ocean could heal anything if a person listened long enough. He wondered what she would have said about the small girl who had shouted his name and changed his fate. A quiet voice broke his thoughts. "Mr. Thomas?" He turned. Amara was standing a few steps behind him, her small frame outlined by the morning light. She was holding a folded piece of paper in her hand. "I found this in the mailbox," she said. "It does not have a name, but it was addressed to you." Thomas took the envelope carefully. The handwriting was rushed and uneven, the ink slightly smudged. Inside was a single page. The message was short. "You still do not see it. The yacht was not the end. The sea keeps secrets, and one of them belongs to you." Thomas's breath caught. The signature at the bottom was a single initial D. Amara looked up at him. "Is it from the man?" He nodded slowly. "It is from Douglas Reeves." She frowned. "What does it mean?" He folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. "I am not sure yet, but if he is writing to me, it means he is still close." For the rest of the day, Thomas could not shake the words from his mind. The sea keeps secrets. What did that mean? The police believed Reeves was in hiding somewhere inland, but Thomas began to suspect otherwise. Reeves had always loved the ocean as much as he had. If he had planned everything around the marina, maybe he had never left it. That evening, Thomas called the detective. "Search the boatyards again," he said, "especially the ones near the old harbor. Reeves might be hiding in plain sight." The detective agreed to send a team at first light. When he ended the call, Thomas walked to the cottage. The lamps inside glowed softly through the windows. Amara and her grandmother were playing a quiet game of checkers at the table. The sight made something inside him ease, if only for a moment. Amara looked up when he entered. "Did you find out what the letter means?" "Not yet," he said, sitting down beside her, "but I will." She tilted her head. "Grandma says the sea only gives back its secrets when people are ready to hear them." Thomas smiled faintly. "Your grandmother is wiser than most philosophers I have met." Her grandmother chuckled softly. "Wisdom is just the sum of mistakes we survive, Mr. Gray." "Oh." The three of them sat together, the quiet hum of the lamp filling the spaces between their words. For the first time, Thomas felt what a home could be, not the size of a house, not the value of its walls, but the warmth shared around a table. Later that night, after they had gone to sleep, Thomas returned to his study. He laid the letter on his desk and stared at it under the soft glow of the desk lamp. His eyes moved over the final line again. "The sea keeps secrets, and one of them belongs to you." Then something stirred in his memory. Years ago, before his wife had died, there had been an accident at the shipyard, a fire that had destroyed records and taken 2 workers' lives. The investigation had been quiet, too quiet. He had signed documents quickly, trusting others to handle it. What if Reeves had been one of those affected by that loss? What if this was not about money or revenge, but justice? The realization struck him like a wave. He pulled out his old company files, spreading them across the desk. Pages yellowed with time, contracts and reports buried beneath years of dust. His hands trembled as he flipped through them until one name caught his eye: Caleb Reeves. The signature matched. Douglas Reeves's younger brother. Thomas leaned back in his chair, his chest heavy. Caleb Reeves had died in that shipyard fire nearly a decade earlier. Thomas had never met his family. He had never even attended the funeral. He had thought it was just another business tragedy, something unfortunate but unavoidable. But now, he saw it clearly. To Douglas Reeves, it had been personal. As the truth settled over him, Thomas felt a strange mix of sorrow and understanding. This was not just about betrayal, it was about grief left to rot into anger. He stepped outside into the cool night air. The sea stretched wide before him, dark and endless. Amara's words came back to him. Maybe the brave ones are the ones who need the most light. He realized then that Reeves's pain had turned into something dangerous because no one had offered him light when he needed it most. Thomas looked toward the horizon, the moon casting silver on the waves. "I will not answer hate with hate," he whispered. "This ends differently." The ocean breeze lifted, brushing against his face like a quiet acknowledgement. And somewhere far beyond the cliffs, a single light blinked on the water, small, distant, but steady. The following morning broke with a thin mist hanging over the ocean, the kind that softened every sound and turned the air into silver. Thomas Gray stood at the edge of the cliffs, his coat tugged by the wind, watching the waves crash below. The letter from Douglas Reeves was still folded in his pocket. The paper had grown soft from how many times he had opened it, read it, and folded it again. Behind him, footsteps approached quietly. "You have been out here since sunrise," Amara said. Her voice was small but sure, cutting through the wind like a single clear note. Thomas turned, smiling faintly. "I did not hear you come out." She pulled her scarf tighter. "Grandma said you did not eat breakfast, so I brought you some bread." She held out a napkin-wrapped bundle. Her hands were cold, but her eyes were steady. He accepted it gently. "Thank you, Amara. You always seem to know when I need something." She looked toward the sea. "You are thinking about that man again, aren't you?" Thomas nodded. "Yes, I think I finally understand why he did what he did." "Because of his brother?" she asked. He looked at her, surprised. "How did you know?" "I heard you talking to the detective last night," she said softly. "You said his brother died in the fire." Thomas sighed, the sound heavy. "Yes, a fire that happened because of my company's negligence. I did not even know his name until yesterday. I let other people handle the aftermath while I moved on with my life." Amara studied his face carefully. "So he wanted you to remember?" Thomas looked back at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to burn through the fog. "He wanted me to feel what he felt, loss, guilt, and the need for justice. But revenge never heals anything. It only spreads the pain." Amara took a deep breath. "Grandma says the only way to make peace is to face what you ran away from." He smiled faintly. "Your grandmother is a very wise woman." Amara nodded. "She says the ocean keeps secrets until people are brave enough to ask for forgiveness." Her words struck something deep in him. "Maybe it is time I ask for it," he said quietly. Later that day, Thomas called the detective and requested a meeting with Douglas Reeves if he could be found. The detective hesitated. "Are you sure, Mr. Gray? He is still considered dangerous." "I am sure," Thomas said. "He needs to hear something from me, and I need to hear from him." The detective promised to reach out to his contacts. As evening fell, Thomas sat in his study, reviewing the old shipyard reports again. He traced the names of the two men who had died in the fire, Caleb Reeves and another worker named Henry Dawson. The memory of those forgotten names weighed heavier than any deal he had ever signed. The sound of laughter floated in from the garden. Amara was outside with her grandmother, collecting flowers before nightfall. The sight from the window made his heart ache and heal at the same time. These two people had come into his life by accident, but now they were the only reason he still believed in something good. After dinner, Thomas walked them back to the cottage. The air was cool, and the stars shimmered like scattered glass across the dark sky. "Do you ever miss the city, Amara?" he asked as they walked. She shook her head. "The city never looked at me. The sea listens, but the city never did." He smiled at her honesty. "You have a gift for seeing what others overlook." She looked up at him. "That is not a gift. It is just paying attention." He chuckled softly. "Well, that is something the world could use more of." At the cottage door, her grandmother turned to him. "You look lighter tonight," she said. Thomas nodded. "Maybe it is because I finally stopped running from the truth." "Then do not start running again," she said gently. "When people run, they lose sight of the light that was waiting to guide them." He promised he would not. That night, Thomas could not sleep. The wind had picked up again, carrying the scent of salt and rain. He stood by the window, staring out at the sea. Far out in the distance, a small fishing boat rocked against the waves. Its single light flickered against the darkness, almost like a heartbeat. Then his phone buzzed. It was the detective. "We found him," the voice said. "Douglas Reeves was spotted near the old shipyard. He is not armed, and he says he wants to talk." Thomas felt his chest tighten. Where? At the pier. He said he would wait until midnight. Thomas ended the call and stood for a long moment, listening to the sound of the waves outside. He knew he could not tell Amara or her grandmother, not because he wanted to hide it, but because he did not want them to worry. He drove alone through the sleeping town. The road wound between the cliffs and the shore, the headlights casting long shadows that bent with the curve of the sea. When he reached the pier, he saw a man standing at the far end, his coat whipping in the wind. It was Douglas Reeves. Thomas stepped out of the car slowly, his shoes crunching on the wet boards. The distance between them closed with every careful step. Reeves turned, his face older and thinner than Thomas remembered. His eyes held exhaustion more than hatred. "You came," Reeves said quietly. "I did," Thomas replied, "because I finally understand." Reeves' jaw tightened. "Do you? Do you know what it is like to bury your brother because someone valued profits over people?" Thomas did not flinch. "No, but I know what it is like to live with the weight of a mistake you cannot undo. I should have been there. I should have known." The wind howled through the pier. Reeves stared at him, searching his face for something he could not name. "And now what? Do you think saying sorry will change anything?" "No," Thomas said simply. "But it is a start." For a long time, neither man spoke. The waves broke against the wooden posts below, steady and relentless. Then Reeves lowered his head. "He loved the sea, you know, Caleb. He said it was the only place he felt free." Thomas's voice was soft. "Then let us both keep it that way. Let us not turn it into a graveyard for more regret." Reeves said nothing, but his shoulders eased slightly. When Thomas turned to leave, Reeves whispered, "You have a little girl looking after you now. She saved you once. Maybe she will save me too." Thomas looked back. Maybe she already has. As he drove home under the heavy sky, Thomas felt something shift inside him, not relief, not victory, but understanding. The kind that came only when truth and forgiveness finally met halfway. The morning after Thomas Gray met Douglas Reeves, the sea was calm, as though the night's confession had quieted even the waves. A faint mist lingered above the water, and the first light of dawn stretched across the horizon like a promise of peace. Yet beneath that calm surface, something unsettled moved, an instinct that told Thomas the story was not finished. He sat at his desk, watching the steam rise from his untouched cup of coffee. On the corner of his desk lay the folded letter Reeves had sent days earlier. Now, beside it, rested a new envelope. Reeves had handed it to him at the pier before disappearing into the fog. The handwriting was the same, sharp, deliberate, but this time the words inside were heavier. "There is another name. The man who gave the order to delay repairs at the shipyard, the same delay that killed my brother, still works for you. I wanted to confront him myself, but you deserve to know first. Be careful, he does not forgive, and he does not forget." The letter ended with no signature. Only a single word was written at the bottom: justice. Thomas leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. If what Reeves wrote was true, someone inside his company had been responsible not only for the fire years ago but also for the recent attack. He picked up the phone and called Daniel. "Daniel," he said, his voice steady but sharp. "Bring me the files for every executive who was on the operations team during the shipyard reconstruction. I want their current records, addresses, everything." Daniel hesitated on the other end. "Of course, sir, but may I ask why the sudden urgency?" Thomas's tone was quiet but cold. "Because someone in my company has been hiding behind my name, and I intend to find them before they find me." While waiting, he stepped outside onto the balcony. The sea below glittered like glass. From here, he could see the small cottage where Amara and her grandmother were beginning their day. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, and he could faintly hear Amara's laughter as she spoke to the gardener. For a moment, the sight grounded him. It reminded him why he was doing this, not for revenge, but to make sure no more innocent lives were ever caught in someone else's silence. An hour later, Daniel arrived carrying a stack of folders. He set them on the desk and began listing names. There were 6 executives overseeing the site when the fire occurred. 4 have retired, 1 passed away last year, and 1 still works for the company. Harold Quinn, the head of logistics. Thomas frowned. "Harold Quinn has been with us for years. He managed our shipping routes and supply contracts. I trusted him. Daniel nodded. I remember. He was also responsible for security clearance on the yacht. The realization hit Thomas like a physical blow. Then he was the connection. Reeves may have planted the device, but Quinn made it possible. Oh, Daniel looked uneasy. What do you want me to do? Bring him here, Thomas said. I want to hear his explanation face to face. By late afternoon, Harold Quinn arrived at the villa. He was a tall man with thinning hair and an easy smile that had always disguised his ambition. Thomas met him in the study, the sea visible through the window behind him. Harold, Thomas began calmly, I have a few questions about the fire at the shipyard 10 years ago. Quinn's smile faltered. The fire? That was an accident, Thomas. Why bring it up now? Because Douglas Reeves does not think it was, Thomas said. He slid the letter across the desk. And I have reason to believe you were involved. Quinn read the letter, his jaw tightening. That man is unstable. You cannot trust anything he says. Thomas leaned forward. Then explain why you signed the order to delay safety inspections, the very delay that caused the explosion. Quinn's eyes flickered, a flash of guilt quickly masked by anger. You would not understand. You were too busy expanding your empire to notice what your decisions cost us. I did what I had to do to keep the company alive. By killing men? Thomas asked, his voice sharp but steady. I did not kill anyone, Quinn snapped. But I lost everything after that fire. I was supposed to be promoted, but you blamed me instead. I spent years rebuilding my reputation while you lived comfortably on apologies and donations. Reeves came to me because he understood what it meant to be forgotten. Thomas stared at him. So you helped him. Quinn's silence was the only answer needed. Before Thomas could speak again, the sound of footsteps echoed outside. Amara's small voice floated through the doorway. Mr. Thomas, Grandma said dinner is ready. Quinn turned sharply, startled. Thomas stood, blocking his line of sight to the door. Leave her out of this, he said firmly. Quinn's expression shifted guilt, anger, and fear all tangled together. You think you can fix this with kindness and words? You cannot undo what we did. Thomas's voice was calm but cold as steel. No, but I can stop it from happening again. He pressed the intercom on his desk. Daniel, call the police. Mr. Quinn has something to confess. Quinn's shoulders slumped, his resistance fading. As Daniel entered with 2 officers, Quinn muttered, He was right about one thing you have changed. The Thomas Gray I knew would have buried this story like all the others. Thomas looked at him steadily. Then maybe this is the first time I am doing something right. After Quinn was taken away, Thomas stepped outside. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the first stars shimmered faintly over the sea. Amara was sitting on the porch steps, her drawing book open on her lap. She looked up when she saw him. Everything all right? She asked. Thomas sat beside her. Yes, it is finally beginning to be. She studied his face for a moment. You look tired, but also lighter. He smiled softly, maybe because the truth finally found its way to the surface. Amara nodded, closing her sketchbook. Grandma says the sea always gives back what people try to hide. Thomas glanced toward the horizon, where the last line of sunlight touched the water. Then maybe tonight, it gave me back my conscience. The wind carried the scent of salt and promise, and for the first time in years, Thomas Gray felt something close to peace earned, not given. That night, after Harold Quinn had been taken away by the police, the house fell into a silence that felt different from the nights before. It was not heavy or tense. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a storm when the air finally begins to breathe again. Thomas Gray stood on his balcony, staring out at the vast ocean under a sky full of stars. The wind was soft, carrying the faint scent of salt and wild jasmine from the cliffs below. For the first time in a long time, the world felt still. Below, in the small cottage, a single light glowed from Amara's room. Thomas could see her shadow moving across the window as she arranged something on her desk. He smiled faintly. Even at night, she seemed full of motion, as if her heart refused to rest until she found meaning in everything she saw. When he went downstairs, he found her sitting on the porch steps with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked up at him with a sleepy smile. You are still awake, she said. So are you, he replied gently. It is very late, Amara. She nodded. I could not sleep. The sea sounds different tonight. Thomas sat beside her, pulling his coat tighter against the breeze. How so? It is softer, she said, like it is tired but happy. He chuckled quietly. Maybe the sea knows we made peace today. Amara tilted her head. Did you tell the truth? Thomas nodded. Yes, everything that should have been said years ago has finally been spoken. Then Grandma would say the sea is listening, she whispered. She says truth is the only language it understands. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the waves roll in steady rhythm against the shore. Then Amara spoke again, her voice quiet but certain. Do you think that man, Mr. Reeves, will ever forgive you? Thomas exhaled slowly. I do not know, but forgiveness is not something we earn, it is something others choose to give. All I can do is make sure I live differently now. Amara looked up at him. You already do. Her certainty hit him harder than any accusation ever had. He turned toward her, studying her small face framed by the dim porch light. You are very wise for your age, Amara. She shrugged lightly. Grandma says listening makes people wise. Talking too much makes them loud. He smiled. Your grandmother sounds like a philosopher. She just says what she feels, Amara said softly. When people stop listening to their hearts, they start breaking things they love. Her words lingered in his mind long after she had gone inside. He remained on the porch, watching the stars fade slowly as clouds drifted in from the sea. By morning, the weather had turned cool again. The air was crisp, and sunlight shimmered across the water. Thomas met with the detective for the final time regarding the case. Reeves turned himself in last night, the detective said. He wanted us to know that he was done running. He said your conversation helped him see what his brother would have wanted. Thomas felt something loosen inside his chest. He deserves peace, he said quietly. We all do. The detective nodded. The company's internal investigation will continue, but from here, things should settle. When the detective left, Thomas walked down to the garden, where Amara was sitting under the large oak tree with her sketchbook open on her lap. She looked up as he approached. Is it over? She asked. Yes, he said softly. It is over. Amara smiled. Then maybe we can all breathe again. He nodded. Yes, I think we can. She turned her sketchbook around to show him her latest drawing. It was the view of the sea from the cliffs, but in the sky above, she had drawn a faint outline of two hands reaching toward each other, one light, one shadowed. Beneath it, she had written, Truth always meets the brave halfway. Thomas stared at it for a long time before speaking. That is beautiful, Amara. You have captured something I could never put into words. It is what I saw, she said simply. The sea told me. He smiled gently. Then the sea must like you very much. For the next few hours, they walked along the beach, the tide low enough to reveal smooth stones and bits of seashells glinting like tiny treasures. Amara picked up a white shell shaped like a spiral and pressed it to her ear. It is still talking, she said. It says people can start again if they want to. Thomas crouched beside her. Then let us both start again. They stayed there until the sun was high and warm on their faces. When they returned to the cottage, Amara's grandmother had prepared lunch. The smell of baked bread and herbs filled the air. She looked at Thomas and said, You look like a man who has finally made peace with his ghosts. Thomas nodded. Thanks to both of you. Her eyes softened. No, Mr. Gray. Peace was already waiting for you. You just needed someone to remind you where to look. That evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Thomas stood by the cliffs once more. He thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the warning, the fear, and finally, the truth. It all felt distant now, like echoes fading into the wind. Amara joined him, carrying her small seashell. Grandma says every story needs an ending, she said. He smiled. And what do you think this ending should be? Amara looked toward the horizon. Maybe not an ending, she said thoughtfully. Maybe it is just the part where everyone learns how to begin again. Thomas looked down at her, his heart full of quiet gratitude. You might be right, he said. Sometimes the best endings are really new beginnings. The sky deepened into a soft orange glow, and the waves shimmered like liquid gold beneath it. Together they stood in silence, listening to the steady heartbeat of the ocean. For the first time in years, Thomas Gray felt like he was not merely surviving life, he was living it. And beside him, The little girl who once shouted a warning at the edge of a dock had become the voice that led him back to the truth. The next morning dawned soft and golden, with light spilling gently over the coastline. The world around Thomas Gray's estate seemed to breathe again. Quiet waves brushed the shore, the gulls wheeled lazily above the cliffs, and the air carried the scent of salt and dew. Thomas stood by the window of his study, watching the first fishing boats move across the water like tiny silhouettes of persistence. The house no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a home. He turned when he heard small footsteps behind him. Amara appeared at the doorway, holding her sketchbook close to her chest. Her hair was tied in 2 loose braids, and her face glowed with the kind of calm that only comes after long storms. "Good morning, Mr. Thomas," she said with her usual brightness. "Good morning, Amara," he replied. "You are up early." "I wanted to see the sunrise," she said, walking to the window beside him. "Grandma says every sunrise is a second chance. I did not want to miss it." Thomas smiled. "Your grandmother is right about many things." Amara looked up at him. "Do grown-ups get second chances too?" He hesitated for a moment, then answered quietly. "Yes, if they are brave enough to take them." She seemed to think about that, then nodded as if satisfied. "Then you are brave, Mr. Thomas." Her words made him pause. "What makes you think that?" "You listened," she said simply. "Most people do not." The truth in her voice settled deep in his chest. "I suppose listening can change more than speaking ever could." Later that morning, Thomas invited Amara and her grandmother to the main house for breakfast. The long dining table, once a place of business meetings and cold conversations, now held the warmth of family, fresh fruit, eggs, and the smell of coffee and bread. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, and the laughter of 2 voices filled the air. As they ate, Amara's grandmother looked around the room, her eyes thoughtful. "You have built something beautiful here, Mr. Gray," she said. "But beauty means little unless it is shared." Thomas nodded. "That is why I asked you both to come. I wanted to talk to you about something important." Amara looked up from her plate. "Is it about the sea again?" Thomas smiled softly. "In a way, yes. I have decided to rebuild the shipyard, the one where the fire happened. But this time, it will not just be for business. I want to create something that gives people second chances. Jobs, education, and a place where no one is forgotten." Her grandmother's eyes softened. "That sounds like a fine thing to do." Thomas looked directly at Amara. "And I want to name it after your grandmother. The Evelyn Foundation." Amara's mouth fell open slightly. "After Grandma?" He nodded. "Because her wisdom saved more lives than she will ever know, and because she raised a girl who reminded me what it means to care." For a moment, the old woman said nothing. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her teacup. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Thomas said gently, "because I cannot do it without you both." Amara grinned. "Grandma, you have to say yes. That means we can help people." Her grandmother smiled through tears. "Then yes, Mr. Gray, we will help you." The moment hung warm and full between them. Thomas felt something shift inside him, a quiet realization that redemption was not a single act, but a choice made every day to be better than before. That afternoon, they visited the site of the old shipyard together. The air smelled faintly of rust and salt, but the sea was calm. The skeletal remains of old docks stood against the horizon, weathered but unbroken. Amara ran ahead, her small feet splashing through shallow puddles left by the tide. "It looks sad," she said softly, "like it is waiting to be forgiven." Thomas knelt beside her. "Then we will forgive it together, and we will rebuild." She smiled, holding out her hand. "Then it is a promise." He shook her hand solemnly. "A promise." As they walked along the pier, Amara found a piece of driftwood shaped like a heart. She held it up proudly. "We can put this at the new shipyard," she said. "It can be the first thing people see when they come." Thomas nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "That is a wonderful idea." The sun began to sink low over the water, turning everything to gold. Amara sat on the edge of the pier, her legs swinging above the waves. Thomas stood a few steps behind her, watching the reflection of the light on her face. She turned and said, "Mr. Thomas, do you think the sea ever gets tired of forgiving people?" He smiled gently. "No, Amara, I think it forgives because it understands. The sea knows people make mistakes. but it also knows that what matters most is what they do after. She seemed to think deeply about that before saying softly, "Then I hope I grow up to be like the sea." Thomas's heart swelled. "You already are," he said quietly. "You already are." That night, as they returned to the house, the sky glowed with 1,000 stars. The sea shimmered like a mirror, calm and alive. Thomas stood at his window once more, looking out toward the horizon. The reflection of the moon on the water reminded him of the beginning, the moment a little girl's voice had cut through chaos and saved his life. Now, that same voice had done something even greater. It had saved his soul. And as the waves whispered softly against the shore, Thomas Gray made a silent vow that the foundation they would build together would not just restore a shipyard, but restore hope, because one brave child had taught him that the smallest voices could carry the strongest truth. The morning air at the old shipyard was filled with the scent of salt, rust, and new beginnings. Seagulls called above the cranes that now stood tall again, their metal arms stretching toward the rising Sunday. Workers moved across the docks with purpose, their boots thudding against wood that had been newly restored. It had taken months of planning, rebuilding, and long nights of resolve, but now the place that once held tragedy was alive with sound and light once more. Thomas Gray stood near the pier, his coat fluttering in the breeze. His eyes followed the water as it shimmered under the sunlight. Where there had once been ashes and silence, there were now hammers, laughter, and hope. The sign hanging from the newly painted gate read, "The Evelyn Foundation Shipyard, Building Second Chances." Amara ran up the walkway, holding a clipboard that looked far too large for her small hands. Her braids bounced as she moved, and her smile was brighter than the morning Sunday. "Mr. Thomas," she called, "they said the first training class starts today. Can I watch?" Thomas turned to her, his face softening into a smile. "Of course you can. You helped make all of this happen." Amara beamed. "Grandma says helping people makes the world lighter, like we are carrying some of each other's weight." He nodded. "She is right, as always." Her grandmother approached from behind, walking with her cane but with the same proud posture she always carried. "I told you she remembers everything," she said with a warm laugh. "Even the things you think she is not listening to." Thomas chuckled. "Then I will have to choose my words more carefully." The three of them stood together, watching as a group of workers gathered near the dock for the opening ceremony. The men and women wore uniforms with the foundation's logo stitched onto their sleeves, an ocean wave cradling a rising Sunday. Thomas stepped forward and took the microphone. The sound of the sea filled the small pause before he spoke. "When I first stood here," he began, "this place was quiet. It carried the weight of loss, of mistakes, and of things left unsaid. But today, it carries something new: hope. We are not just rebuilding a shipyard. We are rebuilding faith, trust, and the belief that no life is too broken to begin again." He glanced toward Amara and her grandmother. "This foundation exists because of two people who reminded me what compassion truly means. They showed me that redemption does not come from power or wealth, but from courage and kindness. Their light guided me out of the dark. I hope this place does the same for others." Applause rose around him. Amara clapped the loudest, her small hands echoing against the sound of the waves. After the ceremony, workers and families shared food near the dock. Music played softly from a radio, and laughter mingled with the sound of the sea. Amara and several children from the nearby town gathered around a bucket filled with seashells that had washed ashore. She held up a white spiral shell and showed it proudly to Thomas. "This one looks like it remembers everything," she said. He knelt beside her. "Maybe it does. The sea keeps its memories safe." Amara studied the shell closely. "Then maybe we should leave it here, so it can remember the good things now." Thomas smiled. "A perfect idea." Together, they placed the shell on the edge of the dock, where the water could touch it each time the tide came in. Later that afternoon, the sun began to dip low, turning the sky to shades of rose and amber. The workers packed up their tools, and the shipyard grew quiet again. Thomas walked along the dock, feeling the wooden boards solid beneath his feet, stronger than before, just like the people who had built them. Amara joined him, skipping lightly at his side. "Mr. Thomas," she said, "when I grow up, can I work here too?" He looked down at her with a fond smile. "If you still want to by then, this place will always have a space for you." She nodded firmly. "Then it is a promise." Her grandmother's voice carried from behind them. "Careful what you promise her, Mr. Gray. She remembers every word." Thomas laughed softly. "I would not want it any other way." As they reached the end of the dock, Amara looked out across the water. The ocean stretched endless before them, its surface glowing gold beneath the sinking sunday. "Do you think the sea is happy now?" she asked. Thomas followed her gaze. "Yes," he said quietly, "because it has forgiven, and so have we." "Oh," she smiled, resting her chin on the wooden railing. "Grandma says forgiveness makes room for new stories." He looked at her, his heart full. "Then let us make sure the new stories we build here are worth remembering." The wind carried the sound of the tide against the pilings, steady and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of something reborn. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Thomas stayed behind. He stood by the dock where the last light of day lingered. He thought of everything that had brought him here, the betrayal, the warning, the loss, and the child's voice that had saved him from his own blindness. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal keychain shaped like an anchor. It had belonged to his wife, Vivian. For years, it had been a symbol of grief. Now, it felt like a promise fulfilled. He leaned down and placed it gently beside the seashell Amara had left earlier. As the waves reached up to touch both the shell and the anchor, Thomas whispered softly, "Thank you for letting me begin again." Behind him, the lights of the shipyard glowed bright against the dusk. The Evelyn Foundation had come alive not as a monument to wealth or power, but as proof that even from ruin, compassion could rebuild everything that mattered. And as the tide rolled in, carrying the sound of the ocean's eternal song, Thomas Gray finally understood what Amara had meant all along. The sea did listen, and now it was speaking back. A week after the reopening of the Evelyn Foundation shipyard, the air around the coast carried a different kind of energy, steady, calm, and filled with quiet purpose. The rhythmic sounds of hammers striking steel and waves brushing against the docks blended into something like music, a song of renewal that could only come from people who had once known despair. Thomas Gray walked through the shipyard early that morning, his footsteps echoing on the wooden planks. Workers greeted him warmly as he passed, some tipping their hats, others simply smiling. It still felt strange to him to be seen not as a distant figure of authority, but as a man who had chosen to stand among them. He stopped at the far end of the dock where the ocean spread wide and silver before him. From this angle, he could see the small, heart-shaped piece of driftwood that Amara had left by the water's edge. The waves had not carried it away. Somehow, it always remained, pressed against the post as if the sea itself refused to take it. He smiled to himself, whispering, "The sea keeps what it loves." Behind him came the sound of light footsteps. "Mr. Thomas!" Amara's voice carried through the cool morning air. She ran toward him, waving a folded piece of paper above her head. The newspaper printed it. He turned as she reached him, slightly out of breath. "Printed what?" "Our story," she said proudly, handing him the paper. "The Evelyn Foundation. They wrote about it. Grandma says people all over the city are reading it." Thomas unfolded the paper and scanned the headline. "From Fire to Faith, How One Man and a Child Rebuilt What the Sea Took." Beneath it was a photo of the shipyard, with Amara standing beside him, both of them smiling. He read a few lines aloud. "A tragedy once marked this coast, but now it stands as a symbol of hope, born from compassion and courage." His voice softened. "They got it right, Amara. It was courage that built this, not money." She grinned. "Grandma says courage is just love wearing its brave face." Thomas chuckled. "Your grandmother could start a school for wisdom and fill it by the end of the week." Amara nodded seriously. "She says we learn the most from the people who listen the best." They stood side by side, looking out at the waves, the sound of the tide steady and low. After a moment, Thomas said, "You know, I have been thinking about something. The foundation is running well, but I want to do more something for the children here. Many of their families lost so much after the fire." Amara tilted her head, curious. "Like what kind of something?" "A learning center," he said. "A place where children can come after school to learn skills, read, or simply feel safe. I would like you and your grandmother to help me plan it." Her eyes widened. "Really? We can help?" "Of course," he said. "I cannot think of anyone better to tell me what children truly need." She beamed, her excitement spilling over. Then we have to start today. Grandma always says planning with the heart works better than planning with paper. Thomas smiled. Then let us start with the heart. They spent the morning walking through the shipyard, pointing out old storage buildings that could be turned into classrooms. Amara's ideas flowed faster than the tide gardens where children could grow vegetables, a library filled with books about the ocean, and a wall where every child could leave a drawing to remind themselves that their stories mattered. Thomas wrote everything down carefully. You have the soul of an architect, he said. She shook her head. No, Mr. Thomas. You are the builder. I just see what could be. Her words struck him deeply, the kind that stayed long after they were spoken. By midday, the sun shone high above the docks, and the workers gathered for lunch. Thomas joined them for the first time, sitting among them instead of apart. Amara sat beside him, telling stories that made even the toughest of men laugh. For once, there were no walls between them, just people who had survived and were learning how to live again. Later that afternoon, when most of the workers had gone home, Thomas and Amara walked back to the cottage. The garden around it had begun to bloom again, lavender, rosemary, and wild daisies swaying in the breeze. Her grandmother was sitting on the porch, sewing a patch onto a worn blanket. She looked up and smiled as they approached. Did you conquer the world again today? She asked with a teasing glint in her eyes. Amara nodded proudly. Mr. Thomas said we are going to make a school, a real one. Her grandmother looked at him, her expression softening. A school, she repeated quietly. That would be a good thing, the best kind of legacy. Thomas nodded. That is the hope, a place for light to keep growing. The older woman reached for his hand. You know, Mr. Gray, there is something my husband used to say before he passed. He said a man cannot change the past, but he can plant a future strong enough to shade others from its mistakes. Thomas's voice caught slightly. Then I suppose that is what I want to do, plant a future. Oh, that evening, after dinner, the three of them sat by the fireplace. The sea outside whispered softly, and the stars hung low and bright over the horizon. Amara had fallen asleep on the rug, her sketchbook open beside her. On the page, she had drawn the shipyard under a sky full of stars, with the words, Home for Hope, written in her careful handwriting. Thomas watched the fire flicker, thinking about all that had been lost and all that had been found. He glanced toward the window, where he could see the reflection of the sea shimmering in the moonlight. And for the first time since the tragedy that had started it all, Thomas Gray did not feel haunted by the past. He felt guided by it, guided toward something better, something that was no longer just his story, but theirs. He whispered softly, Thank you, Amara. The ocean outside answered in its steady rhythm, its voice no longer a warning, but a lullaby of peace. The following morning arrived bright and clear, the sky painted in soft shades of rose and gold. The sea shimmered with light as if it too had woken with purpose. Thomas Gray stood in front of the old storage building near the shipyard, now chosen to become the new learning center. The place smelled faintly of salt and cedar, and though the walls were still worn, he could already imagine them filled with laughter and life. Amara skipped across the yard toward him, holding a notebook almost as large as her arms. Mr. Thomas, she called, I made a list for the school. Thomas turned, smiling. A list already? You have been working hard. She opened the notebook proudly. We need books, a garden, a chalkboard, and one wall just for drawings. Oh, and snacks for after lessons. Thomas laughed softly. You thought of everything. Amara grinned. Grandma says learning works better when your stomach is happy. Her grandmother joined them a moment later, walking slowly but smiling. And she is right, she said. Children learn best when they feel safe and seen. Thomas nodded. Then that is what we will build here, a place where no one feels small or forgotten. Together they stepped inside the building. Dust floated in the air like fine glitter as sunlight streamed through the high windows. Amara twirled slowly, looking around. It smells old, she said, but kind of like stories that are waiting to be told. Her words made Thomas smile. Then we will fill it with new ones. He pointed toward one corner of the room. We can build a reading space there, cushions, shelves, and maybe a lamp shaped like a lighthouse. Amara's eyes widened. A lighthouse, because it helps people find their way back. Exactly, Thomas said. Every story should do that. They spent the rest of the morning sketching ideas on the back of wooden crates. Amara drew with quick, confident lines, a circle for the garden, rectangles for desks, stars over the door. Her grandmother suggested adding a bench outside where parents could sit while waiting. Thomas wrote it all down carefully, his handwriting neat and deliberate. When the sun reached its highest point, they stepped outside to rest. The waves crashed softly against the pier, and gulls called above. Amara sat on a large rock, gazing at the sea. "Mr. Thomas," she said, "do you think this place will make people believe in good things again?" He looked out toward the water, his voice calm but certain. "I think it already has." "You did that, Amara. You reminded all of us that kindness is stronger than fear." She smiled shyly. "I just shouted that day because it felt right. And that was enough to save a life," he said. "Sometimes the right thing does not need to be big. It just needs to be true." The wind lifted her braids gently, carrying her laughter toward the horizon. In that moment, surrounded by sunlight, sea, and hope, Thomas Gray knew that this was more than rebuilding, it was rebirth. And standing beside the little girl who had once cried out to warn him, he realized that the truest kind of redemption was not about being forgiven. It was about becoming someone worthy of it. The first day of the new learning center arrived beneath a sky the color of morning pearls. The sea was calm, and the scent of fresh paint and salt air drifted together across the docks. The old storage building had transformed completely. Where there had once been rust and dust, there were now bright walls, bookshelves made from reclaimed wood, and a large chalkboard that stretched almost the entire length of one wall. Thomas Gray stood at the entrance, watching as children from the nearby town gathered in front of the door. Some clutched notebooks, others held flowers, wide-eyed and smiling. Their laughter rose like a melody, echoing through the open air. For a moment, Thomas simply listened. It was the sound of new beginnings. Amara stood beside him, wearing a small blue ribbon in her hair. She was holding a basket filled with seashells she had collected the day before. "These are for the first students," she said. "Each one gets a shell to remind them that the sea always listens." Thomas smiled. "That is a wonderful idea, Amara. You always think of the details that matter most." Her grandmother joined them, dressed neatly in a floral blouse, her eyes bright with pride. "You did it, Mr. Gray," she said softly. "You turned a wound into something that heals." Thomas shook his head gently. "No, we did it. You and Amara gave it heart." When the clock struck 9, he stepped forward to address the small crowd. "Welcome," he began, his voice calm and steady. "This place is not just a school. It is a home for stories, for courage, and for second chances. The Evelyn Learning Center was built to remind us all that kindness is the foundation of every great future." Applause followed, but it was Amara who caught everyone's attention next. She walked to the front, holding her basket of shells. "The sea remembers," she said in a clear, confident voice. "So when you are here, be kind, be brave, and listen, because even small voices can change everything." Her words struck deep, the kind of truth that silences noise and fills space with meaning. Thomas felt a lump form in his throat as he watched her, this little girl who had once been a stranger shouting on a dock, now standing before a crowd as the soul of everything he hoped to become. After the ribbon was cut, the children rushed inside, filling the room with energy and laughter. Amara helped them choose books and place their seashells on the windowsills. Each shell caught the sunlight, scattering faint reflections like tiny stars. Standing by the doorway, Thomas whispered to himself, "This is what redemption looks like." The ocean breeze swept through the open windows, carrying the scent of salt and new paint, as if the sea itself approved. And when Amara looked back at him with her bright, knowing smile, he realized something simple, yet eternal. Some voices do not just save lives, they rebuild them. Evening settled softly over the coastline, painting the horizon in shades of gold and violet. The ocean stretched endlessly before the Evelyn Learning Center, its waves glinting beneath the last rays of the Sunday. The day had been long and full, yet no one seemed tired. The laughter of children still floated through the open windows, mixing with the hum of the tide. It was the kind of sound that carried peace, the kind that reminded Thomas Gray of how far they had all come. He stood at the edge of the dock, his hands resting on the wooden rail. Behind him, The lights of the new center glowed warm and steady. Inside, Amara and her grandmother were tidying the tables after the first day's lessons. He could hear Amara's clear, bright voice as she recited something she had written on the chalkboard. "The sea listens," she said, her voice echoing softly. "And when it listens, it remembers. It remembers those who were brave enough to speak with kindness." Thomas turned, smiling to himself. The words were simple, but they held more truth than most speeches he had ever given. When she came outside, carrying her grandmother's shawl, the sky was already deepening to indigo. "It was a good day," she said proudly. "It was more than good," Thomas replied. "It was the beginning of something that will last." Amara stepped beside him and looked out at the waves. "Do you think the sea is proud of us?" Thomas followed her gaze. The surface shimmered like glass, calm and endless. "I think it is grateful," he said. "You gave it back its story." She smiled and leaned her elbows on the railing. "Grandma says stories never really end. They just find new voices." "One," he nodded, his heart full. "Then maybe this one belongs to you now." Her eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes," Thomas said gently. "You were the one who saw the truth when no one else did. You were the one who shouted when it mattered. Everything that followed began with your courage." Amara looked down at the water. "I was scared that day," she said quietly. "Being scared does not make you weak," Thomas replied. "It means you cared enough to act even when it hurt." The wind lifted her braids as she whispered, "Grandma says brave people do not wait for permission to do what is right." Thomas smiled. "Your grandmother is right about that too." They stood there together, the sound of the waves folding around them like a lullaby. The lights from the learning center shimmered across the water, each reflection dancing like a small star. Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out a single white seashell, the last one from Amara's basket. He placed it on the railing between them. "For you," he said, "to remind you that the sea will always be listening." Amara held the shell carefully, her small fingers tracing its smooth curve. "Then I will listen back," she said. The first stars appeared above them, one by one, bright and clear. Behind them, her grandmother called softly, "It is time to go home, Amara." Amara turned toward the lighted path and then back to Thomas. "Good night, Mr. Thomas." "Good night, Amara," he said. "And thank you for everything." She ran toward her grandmother, her laughter carrying across the water like a bell. Thomas watched until they disappeared down the path. The sea breathed in and out below him, calm and infinite. He closed his eyes, letting the sound fill him completely. For the first time in years, Thomas Gray did not feel haunted by what had been lost. He felt guided by what had been found, a voice, small but strong, that had turned warning into hope. And as the waves rolled toward the shore, steady and eternal, he whispered into the wind, "The sea listened."